Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're unpacking a chapter from a source you shared with us, and it really hits at something core, doesn't it? This powerful, almost desperate need we have to be certain about things.
It really does. And our mission, really, for this deep dive is to get into why. Why do we cling so fiercely to our beliefs, even when, the evidence just isn't there? And maybe even more surprisingly, explore this idea that actually embracing that we're often wrong, well, that might be the best way to grow and honestly live a better life.
Yeah, get ready for a bit of a mind bender, because we're going to look at some, frankly, wild historical examples of how wrong entire societies can be. We'll also peek inside our own brains, see how they work, or sometimes don't work quite right, and really make a case for why maybe, just maybe, being okay with being wrong could be, like, the most important skill you develop. Let's dive in.
Okay, so where do we start? How about just acknowledging that being wrong isn't some, rare glitch? It's kind of been the default human setting throughout history. We're talking about things that sound completely unbelievable now, but people treated them as absolute fact.
Oh, totally. Like, imagine being a map maker 500 years back, super meticulous, drawing the world, and being utterly convinced California is an island. Not just like a small error, but a widely accepted truth. Or think about centuries of medicine, where doctors were certain that bleeding people was the key to curing disease because of, what, humors.
Exactly. They were positive it worked. And think about basic science.
Right.
The idea that fire was made of this thing called phlogiston. Or, for ages, the absolute certainty that the sun and everything else revolved around the earth.
That was just the model. You didn't question it.
Dominant paradigms, yeah.
Uh,
And it wasn't just the huge scientific stuff. The source even mentions some. Well, let's call them creative certainties.
like what?
Like, people genuinely believing that rubbing dog urine on your face was a good anti-aging strategy.
Seriously. Wow.
Okay.
People believed it. They acted on these beliefs.
It just shows really powerfully that just because everyone agrees or it's always been done that way doesn't make it true.
Right.
But this isn't just ancient history, is it? The author gets really personal, shares his own journey of just being wrong constantly. And it's stuff that feels, well, very relatable.
Oh, yeah, the childhood ones are classic. Thinking mediocre was a type of vegetable you didn't want to eat,
Huh.
or being convinced his brother had a secret passageway in the wall. Turns out it was just the bathroom window.
Simple explanations, but your kid brain makes up something else entirely.
And confusing Washington, D.C. with B.C. Thinking a school trip involved actual time travel back to the dinosaurs because, B.C. was a long time ago.
Those early certainties, they seem funny now, but they felt real then.
And it keeps going,
Yeah.
right? The teenage years, all that pretending not to care when you desperately do.
Oh, yeah. Developing these rigid ideas about what happiness is or love or what's cool, only to find out later you were completely off base.
And relationships.
Oh,
The certainty that your first girlfriend must be the one forever. Then the crash, and the certainty you'll never feel that way again.
Right. Been there.
Then you do feel it again, and maybe you're certain love isn't enough. Until later you figure out love is something more fluid, something you actually define yourself.
And what really hits home from all these stories is the author's conclusion. He basically says, every step of the way I was wrong. About everything. He goes on, flat out wrong about myself, others, society, culture, the world, the universe, everything.
Which sounds pretty harsh at first.
It does, but then the source flips it, reframes it in this really positive way. It suggests being wrong is actually a sign of progress.
Like the Michael Jordan thing.
Exactly. Jordan didn't succeed by never missing. He succeeded because he failed constantly and learned from it. The author sees his own life getting better because he keeps finding out where he was mistaken.
So growth isn't about reaching some final right answer.
Not at all. It's iterative. It's a process. You don't go from wrong to perfectly right. You go from wrong to maybe slightly less wrong.
And then, hopefully, a little less wrong after that.
Yeah. So the goal isn't finding that ultimate truth and just stopping. It's about constantly looking at where you are now, chipping away at the wrongness so you can be, like the source says, a little less wrong tomorrow.
That feels more manageable, actually. A continuous refinement.
Precisely. Humble, never ending.
Okay, so if we're all wrong so much, why are we so driven to feel certain? Where does that need come from? The source points to our brains, and there's this psych experiment it described.
Oh, yeah, the button experiment is fascinating. Imagine you're in a room, right?
Yeah.
Just some buttons, and you're told you get points for pushing them. If you figure out the right way to push them, you get more points. So you start trying things, red, blue, green, whatever.
Okay.
And randomly, points appear on a screen.
So you immediately think, aha, I push red, then green, then waited 2 seconds. That's it.
Exactly. People come up with these incredibly complex personal theories about why they got points. They're totally convinced they've cracked the code.
But the twist is,
The points are completely random. There is no code, no sequence, no logic at all.
wow. So everyone walks out thinking they're a genius, but it was just chance.
Every single person, utterly convinced. It's stark, but it perfectly shows how fast our minds create patterns, create beliefs that just aren't real. The source is blunt, calls it generating a bunch of bullshit.
I mean, yeah, it kind of feels like that sometimes.
Yeah.
But it shows what the brain's trying to do, right? It's a meaning machine.
That's its core job. Generate understanding by linking experiences. Push this, light comes on cause and effect, friend smiles, says hi, okay, that's positive. It's building these links constantly to make sense of everything.
Which is super useful, obviously. Lets us navigate the world.
Incredibly efficient, yes, but there are two big problems baked into this meaning-making system.
Okay, what are they?
Problem one, the machine itself, our brain, it's flawed. It makes mistakes. We forget stuff. We misinterpret things. We fill in the blanks without even realizing it. We're not perfect tape recorders.
Right, memories aren't exact copies.
And problem two, maybe even trickier. Once we've made that meaning, once we've formed a belief, our brains get really attached. We dig our heels in. We tend to ignore evidence that contradicts what we already know.
We resist letting go.
Massively. Which brings us to that Emo Phillips quote the source uses.
It's perfect.
Which one was that?
I used to think the human brain was the most wonderful organ in my body. Then I realized who was telling me this.
Yeah, that puts it in perspective.
It's funny, but it's deep, right? So much of what we feel certain about, what we think we know, has already been filtered through these built-in glitches and biases.
Meaning, most of our beliefs are probably wrong, at least a little bit.
Or maybe just less wrong than others. And the source argues that accepting that our minds are this jumble of inaccuracy, well, that's a crucial step. It feels weird at first, maybe, but liberating. Yeah, necessary even. Because if you don't accept it, if you cling too hard to that flawed certainty, things can go really wrong, which leads to that story about Meredith Moran.
Yeah, that story is, it's tough, but it's incredibly important for understanding the dangers of misplaced certainty.
So this was back in the late 80s.
Right. Meredith Moran, she's a journalist, and through therapy, she became absolutely certain that her father had sexually abused her as a child. These felt like recovered memories, vivid, powerful, real.
And she acted on that certainty.
Absolutely. Confronted her father, told her family, and the fallout was immense. It ripped the family apart. Pain, division. Her father denied it the whole time.
Until
Years later, the devastating realization hits her. The memory was false. It wasn't real. It was likely constructed unintentionally within the therapeutic environment of the time, which unfortunately sometimes pushed people towards finding trauma.
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
It really is. And it shines a light on how memory actually works. The source uses the telephone game analogy.
Right, where the message gets distorted down the line.
Exactly. Memory isn't like a video recording we just play back. It's more like a reconstruction. Every time we remember something, we rebuild it. And it gets distorted, bits get added, gaps get filled in, often based on how we feel now.
Like if you fall out with your sister, you might remember a past gift from her totally differently than when you were close.
Precisely. Your current anger or sadness literally changes how you recall the past event.
So with Meredith Moran, if you look at her life then, difficult relationship with her dad, some failed relationships. She was researching child abuse for work.
Involved with someone who was an incest survivor and in therapy that encouraged looking for trauma. You could almost see how her brain, that meaning machine, was desperately trying to connect the dots.
Trying to make sense of her present pain by finding a cause in the past.
Right. The brain craves coherence. And the source suggests that sometimes to bridge a gap between present feelings and past understanding, the mind can actually invent events, false memories, to make it all fit together.
And this wasn't just her, right? This false memory syndrome was a bigger issue then.
Huge impact in the 80s and 90s. Wrongful accusations ruined lives. It led to major changes in how therapy was practiced, thankfully. But it's a tragic lesson in just how unreliable our sense of certainty can be.
So when you hear stories like that, all the usual advice like trust yourself, go with your gut, it starts to sound a bit, well, incomplete, maybe even risky.
Doesn't it? If our own minds can build realities that aren't true, if our memories can shift like sand, maybe trust yourself isn't the whole story.
Maybe the better path, as the source suggests, involves more self-skepticism,
Yeah,
rigorously challenging our own assumptions.
it feels counterintuitive, but yeah, questioning your certainties might actually be the safer, more liberating way to go.
Which brings us to another story in the source, an even more extreme example of this kind of dangerous certainty about a woman called Erin.
Right, this is intense. She became completely convinced, utterly certain that she had discovered how to cure death.
Okay, that's a big claim.
Huge claim. And she also decided that the author had to be her boyfriend for this plan to work. It was essential.
And this wasn't just a passing thought for her.
Oh no. This certainty drove years of really disturbing behavior. Flying across the country unannounced multiple times, sending thousands of harassing emails, creating fake online profiles, building a whole website about him.
All based on this conviction.
Complete conviction. Her justification never wavered. They were destined to be together, angels told her. God preordained it. Total certainty.
And what's so unsettling is that, in a way, she was using techniques often praised in self-help, right? Persistence,
Yeah.
visualization.
Exactly. Positive thinking, high self-regard. She had all that. But as the source puts it very bluntly, her core values were severely flawed. Using those techniques didn't make her right. It just made her more effective at pursuing something deeply wrong and harmful.
Wow. It really shows how certainty itself isn't inherently good.
Absolutely not. And this connects to the work of psychologist Roy Baumeister, who studied harm and evil. He found something really interesting.
What was that?
People who do terrible things often don't suffer from low self-esteem. Quite the opposite. They tend to have high self-esteem, coupled with this unwavering certainty in their own righteousness.
So, people who are racist are certain they're superior. Religious fanatics are certain they have a divine mission. Abusers feel entitled.
Exactly. They don't see themselves as the problem. They are absolutely certain everyone else is wrong or evil or deserves what they get.
It kind of reminds you of the Milgram experiments, too, doesn't it?
Definitely mentioned in the source. Ordinary people doing harmful things because they trusted the certainty of the authority figure, the perceived moral rightness of the situation.
And this need for certainty, it messes us up in everyday life, too, not just in these extreme cases.
Oh, for sure. Like being totally certain you deserve a promotion can make you feel insecure and slighted if you don't get it. Demanding absolute certainty in a relationship. That often leads to constant suspicion, checking messages.
Yeah, you end up feeling less secure.
It breeds insecurity. And that insecurity, fueled by needing to be right, can curdle into this nasty sense of insidious entitlement.
Meaning?
Feeling justified in cheating because you're not getting exactly what you feel you deserve. Feeling okay punishing someone who disappointed you. Taking things you think you're owed. It's that backwards law again.
The harder you try to grab onto certainty,
Yeah.
the more insecure and uncertain you actually feel.
Yeah.
It backfires.
But the flip side is also true, and this seems really important.
Yes, this is the key. The more you can tolerate uncertainty, maybe even embrace it, the more comfortable you become with simply not knowing.
And that changes things.
Massively. You don't need to constantly judge other people because you're not clinging to your own rigid certainties. You don't need to constantly judge yourself against some impossible standard.
You can stop needing to know for sure if you're lovable enough or successful enough. Right, because the only way to figure those things out is by living, by staying open, by acting without guarantees and seeing what happens. Uncertainty isn't the enemy. The source calls it the root of all progress and all growth.
You can't learn if you think you already know everything.
Exactly. Admitting you might be wrong, admitting ignorance, that's step one.
So the bottom line is, our values aren't perfect. Being totally certain about them just makes us rigid, maybe entitled, and stops us from taking responsibility when things go wrong.
Yeah. And acknowledging that our beliefs, our actions might just be wrong or aren't actually working, that's the essential first move towards any real change or growth.
It's what lets you actually look at your values critically, see the flaws, and maybe, just maybe, choose better ones.
Which leads perfectly into this other concept from the source called Manson's Law of Avoidance.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's Manson's Law?
It's pretty simple but powerful. The more something threatens your identity, the more you will avoid it.
Ah, okay. So it's about protecting who we think we are.
Exactly. We find comfort in knowing our place, knowing this is me. Anything that shakes that up, that challenges that self-image, feels scary, even if that thing could actually make our lives way better.
So success could be as scary as failure if it means changing your identity.
Absolutely. If your identity is, I'm just a regular, unnoticed person, then sudden success could feel deeply threatening to that comfortable image.
So maybe putting off writing that book isn't just laziness. It's protecting your identity as, say, a sensible accountant, not a potentially rejected writer.
Precisely. Or avoiding that tough conversation with your partner isn't just about avoiding conflict, it's protecting your identity as the nice one or the easygoing one.
These are missed chances for growth then.
Yeah.
Shut down because they rock the boat of who we think we are.
Totally. The source shares a couple of really vivid examples with friends.
Like the artist.
Yeah, the artist friend who talked for years about putting his work online. He did all the prep, saved money, built the site, uploaded everything, but could never hit publish.
Why not? What was he protecting?
His current comfortable identity, an artist nobody's heard of, that felt safe. The identity that terrified him was an artist nobody likes.
Ah, the potential rejection was too much.
Too threatening to his self-worth as an artist. So he chose staying unknown over the risk of being known and disliked, comfortable stagnation over scary growth.
And the other friend, the party guy.
Similar dynamic. Years into that lifestyle, he was miserable, lonely, unhealthy, watching friends move on, build families. He felt envious, but totally stuck.
Couldn't give it up.
Giving up being the party guy felt like dying psychologically, because as the source says, the party guy was all he knew how to be. That identity was everything, even though it was making him unhappy.
We really do cling to these identities, don't we? Even when they hurt us. We favor what feels certain, what feels familiar.
We become fierce protectors, yeah. Biased towards keeping that self-view intact, even if it means avoiding things that could genuinely improve our lives. If you see yourself as bad at math, you'll dodge situations that challenge that, reinforcing the belief.
Which makes you wonder about all that advice to find yourself or know yourself. Maybe that's not always the best goal.
That's exactly the argument. Pursuing finding yourself can lead you to build this really rigid box. You define yourself, create expectations, and then you might limit your own potential because you're trying to stay inside that box.
So what's the alternative then?
It's pretty radical, actually. The source suggests, don't find yourself. I say, never know who you are.
Wait, never know who you are. How is not knowing yourself helpful?
Because staying in a state of not knowing keeps you open. It keeps you searching, discovering. It forces a kind of humility because you're not operating from this fixed idea of this is me, full stop.
And the humility makes you more accepting of others too.
Yeah, because if you admit you don't have yourself all figured out, it's easier to accept that others are different, that you don't have all their answers either.
It reminds me a bit of the Buddhist idea, which the source mentions, about the self being kind of arbitrary, a construction.
Exactly. And there's a real liberation in letting go of that rigid construction. Psychologically, it means if you drop a limiting identity like, oh, I'm just terrible with money.
You're suddenly free to actually do something about it, like make a budget or get advice.
Precisely. You're not betraying who you are. You're just taking action. The kid who stops defining himself as the rebel might suddenly feel free to actually try in school.
There's also that point about realizing your problems aren't unique. That feels liberating too.
Hugely. The source calls it a kind of narcissism to secretly believe your struggles are somehow worse or more special than anyone else's, that you're the exception.
Letting go of that specialness frees you up.
Yeah. And the practical advice to counter this is to define yourself using metrics that are more mundane and broad.
Instead of
narrow, rare, easily threatened identities like the misunderstood genius or the most attractive person in the room. Those are fragile.
So aim for identities like being a student, a partner, a friend, a creator.
Exactly. Things that are more resilient, less tied to specific outcomes or comparisons. They're less likely to breed that sense of entitlement.
Because you have to give up those grandiose ideas about being uniquely talented or intelligent or victimized.
Right. You let go of the entitlement that comes with feeling special. It's like the source compares it to a junkie giving up the needle.
Oof. Strong comparison.
It is, but it highlights the withdrawal. You might miss the emotional highs of feeling unique or superior, but the long-term health is infinitely better.
Okay, so accepting we're wrong is good. Letting go of rigid identity is good. But how do we actually practice this? How do we cultivate uncertainty day to day?
It's hard, no doubt. Questioning yourself feels unnatural sometimes, but the source gives 3 really practical questions to start building that mental muscle.
Let's hear them. Question 1.
Question number 1 is simply, what if I'm wrong?
Okay.
Think back to the example of the friend's brother, the one who was convinced his sister's fiancé was terrible, but swore he wasn't jealous or interfering.
Right. We're often blind to our own motivations.
Totally. We're usually the last ones to see our own envy or anger or insecurity. So making this question a habit, just asking yourself, hang on, am I jealous here? Why am I reacting so strongly? Is it possible she's right and I'm just being defensive? That's an act of humility.
Doesn't mean you are wrong every time you ask.
Absolutely not. Sometimes the other person is off base. But you have to be willing to seriously consider the possibility about yourself.
And the source argues, if you're consistently unhappy, if you keep hitting the same walls, you probably are fundamentally wrong about something important, and this question is where you start digging.
Exactly. It's the entry point.
Yeah.
Then comes question number 2, which is tougher.
What's number 2?
What would it mean if I were wrong?
Okay. Why is that harder?
Because the potential meaning is often painful. Exploring it forces you to challenge your core values or confront uncomfortable truths about your own character or behavior.
This is where that Aristotle quote fits in, right? About entertaining a thought without accepting it.
Perfectly. Can you examine the implications of being wrong without immediately shutting down or agreeing? Can you look at different values, different perspectives? That's key for self-awareness.
So for the brother, criticizing the engagement, asking, what would it mean if I'm wrong, might lead him to think.
It would mean I'm acting like a selfish, insecure, maybe even narcissistic jerk who can't handle my sister making her own choices.
Yeah, nobody wants to admit that. That kind of entitlement hurts the ego.
Exactly. That's the resistance. But you have to probe that meaning to understand what's really driving your certainty.
Okay, makes sense. And the third question.
Question number 3 is the real litmus test. Would being wrong create a better or a worse problem than my current problem for both myself and others?
So acknowledging the problems are inevitable, which set of problems is preferable?
Precisely. It helps you evaluate your underlying values by looking at the consequences of clinging to them versus changing them.
Let's apply it to the brother again. His options.
Okay, option A, the easier route emotionally.
Stick to a certainty, stir up family drama, probably damage his relationship with his sister, maybe permanently. This takes zero self-reflection, zero tolerance for her autonomy, but it creates a lot of misery.
Then option B.
Option B, the harder route. Question his own certainty. Practice humility. Trust his sister's judgment even if he disagrees. Live with the outcome out of love and respect. This forces him to confront his own stuff. Insecurity, control issues, whatever it is, it allows for growth. It creates a better quality problem, even if the wedding still happens and he doesn't like the guy.
But most people pick option A, don't they? Because it feels easier in the moment.
Sadly, yes. It avoids the immediate pain of self-examination, but it leads to much worse longer-term problems, broken relationships, bitterness, stagnation. You're basically choosing to harm a relationship rather than consider you might be wrong, even though considering you're wrong might lead to your own positive development.
Which ties into that rule the author mentions, if it feels like you versus the world.
It's almost always you versus yourself. It's a hard-won lesson. Sure, sometimes other people are genuinely wrong or acting badly, but very often our own internal certainty and the insecurities driving it are the real root of the conflict.
That's a big shift in perspective, a really powerful one.
It really is.
So wrapping this up as we bring this deep dive to a close, the big takeaway isn't really about getting everything right, is it? It's not about achieving perfect knowledge. It's more about accepting this fundamental thing about being human, that we are wrong a lot, and we probably always will be, about many things.
Yeah, we looked at how our brains are these amazing meaning machines, but they're also kind of flawed, wired to create certainty from, let's face it, often shaky foundations. And we saw how desperately clinging to that certainty, especially about who we are and what we value, can trap us. It stops growth, builds resentment, leads to entitlement.
But the flip side, the liberation, comes from letting go of needing to be right all the time. Actively practicing self-skepticism, getting okay with asking, what if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
That seems to be where the real freedom is. It opens you up to actually learn, to evolve, to connect with people more honestly, with more humility and respect.
Exactly. Being wrong isn't the end state. It's not failure. It's just the necessary first step on that path to becoming, a little less wrong.
So here's something to chew on until next time. We know people 500 years from now will probably look back at some of the things we're totally certain about today and just laugh or shake their heads. Given that, what's one belief, one assumption, one certainty you're holding on to right now that maybe, just maybe, you could benefit from questioning, even just a tiny bit?